speaking to. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone, wherever you are across the globe. Welcome to the second session of the Global Markets Encounter, where we continue the discussion on the 2022 crop market update. Let me also mention that the session is being held in English with simultaneous translation into French, and participants can access the French language at the bottom right corner where there is a button which allows you to provide your or select the language that you're looking for. Again, let me also say that we are coming to you live on Zoom, Microsoft Teams, YouTube, and Facebook Live. The session is also available to you on our website. And at this stage, I would like to acknowledge our sponsors. Here we have the USDA. We have also the GIZ.com Cashew, CNFA Pro Cashew, TechnoServe Benin Cashew, SNI, MEA, CMA CGM, Intersnack, and Mekong. Without much ado, Jim, I see you are already connected. I would like to introduce our regular host for the Global Markets Encounter, Jim Fitzpatrick, to take us through and to introduce us to the topic. I would also want to say before Jim, you set the ball rolling, that today we will also be having guests in the form of Jean-Francois Guy, who is the Chief of Party for CNFA Pro Cashew, and who will be talking to us about the crop and markets in the areas of the operation, which are mainly in West Africa. We also have Laurent Gomez, Chief of Party for Shelter for Life Lift Cashew Project in Senegal, Guinea-Bissau, Gambia, and also to bring us some updates from there. And then finally, Abhishek Mishra, who's the head of NATS, Valencia International, who also support us with the market update. So Jim Fitzpatrick, please, you can put on your video and take over from here.
Morning, Ernest. Thank you.
Good morning, and please, you have the floor.
Let me just check. You can see the screen, the slide?
Yes,
Crops.
We can
Great.
see the screen, we can see the slide, and we hear you clearly.
Great. Those are three ladies that we met in Côte d'Ivoire recently, harvesting cashews, as you can see. And thanks to them for a nice photograph. Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. You're very welcome. This is GME 2 of this season, but it's actually number 29 of the GMEs that we've had since 2020. Today, we're going to talk about harvests and production. We'll have a look at the general situation, what people are saying. Insofar as possible, we'll try and anchor that with some numbers. And we look at this question that so many people are asking, which is why are kernels prices so low in Vietnam? And we'll build a conversation around production and trade based on trying to answer that question. As Ernest mentioned, we have some interesting guests today. If you've been with us before, you'll know that from time to time, we invite some people who are immersed in the cashew sector to join us, and we'll get their opinions. I'll set the scene with a few slides first. Today we have Abhishek Mishra, Head of Edible Nuts at Valencia International, well-known company to anyone in the cashew business. We have Jean-Francois Guy of the Pro Cashew Project and CNFA, a project operating in Benin, Burkina Faso, Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Nigeria, boosting trade and boosting productivity of farmers. And we have Laurent Gomez of the Lift Cashew Project, doing similar work for some time in Senegal, the Gambia, and Guinea-Bissau. I'd ask our three guests, if you would, please accept the invitations to join the panel, and that'll just facilitate our conversation a little bit more easily when we come to it. So we'll start by having a look at production, and we'll start in Asia. Three major producers at this time of year in Asia: Vietnam, Cambodia, and India. Probably the most important in some senses, because India is not only the second largest producer in the world, it's also the biggest market. And what we're seeing in India now is that demand is expected to return to growth in 2022 after interruptions to a very strong trend during the pandemic. We've got a crop forecast, a pretty good crop forecast by Indian standards, 750 to 775,000 tons. The current situation in India is that the opening stocks are relatively low. Imports in the first month of the year, I only have the January figures so far, are slightly up on the previous year, but not by any number that's going to make a big difference. But generally, I think what we see in India is a little bit of uncertainty. People are being more careful in their buying of raw cashew nuts. They're concerned about the appreciation of the dollar against the rupee, and naturally they're concerned about demand. When will it pick up? We see that whole grades are not in great demand at the moment, but there appears to be good demand for brokens. I think that imports will be at least at the level of 2021, which was around 866,000 tons total, which is a good number. The all-time record is 923,000 tons. I wouldn't be surprised if that were broken this year. Other points to note in India is that there's often a competition between almonds, imported almonds, and cashews. And almond prices have been rising. And of course, the dollar appreciating impacts the cost of almonds for the consumer in India. It also imports the cost of cashews, because India imports about 50% of the cashews it processes, but only about 50%. So that impact of currency may well hit later. And in times of uncertainty, who knows where the rates will be at that stage. So a relatively optimistic picture in India. We look at the rising star of production in Asia, which is Cambodia. And we have been for some time trying to figure out exactly where the 2021 crop number was. As you might recall, the import figures into Vietnam were almost 1 million tons, which were never really accepted to be correct by just about anyone. Recent discussions in Cambodia seem to indicate a crop last year of around about 400,000 tons. I think it may have been a little bit more than that. But this year, the crop is lower. The crop this year would have been expected to be between 450 and 500,000 tons. Production in Cambodia is expanding and will continue to expand. But what we're seeing this year is maybe a lower than expected crop, and certainly so far, lower quality. So lower outturn means fewer kernels. Prices of RCN, as they would expect at this time of year in Cambodia, are pretty steady, around about 13.25. That's basically a farm gate price from traders and some small processors in Cambodia. If we look in Vietnam, the most complex story at the moment, we're seeing that the arrivals have improved from the crop, 2022 crop, but generally reports are that the crop is not a particularly good crop this year. There is a higher than normal inventory in Vietnam, as I think everyone knows at this stage. But we should note that this stock is in pretty strong hands, and some of it is pretty low quality, I understand. That's just anecdotal reports from various processors who've received some cargo. So lower quality again, and some of it's quite old too. So lower quality old cargo means fewer kernels outturned from that stock when it eventually comes to market. We see slower buying in Vietnam this year. Imports so far, 153,000 tons compared to 239,000 tons for the same first 2 months of 2021. A lot of that will be because buying in Tanzania slowed early. These are not clearly not figures from West Africa yet. It's a little bit too early to have figures for imports to Vietnam from 2022 crop from West Africa. But it does indicate a slightly tightening situation on supply. So, I mean, if you think 153,000 tons imported over 2 months, 153,000 tons is less than 1 month's processing in Vietnam. Exports, in the meantime, still steady, up by 3% on last year's figures for the first 2 months. So let's have a little closer look at the situation in Vietnam and Cambodia. So you can see these are in-shell production numbers. The blue is Cambodia, the red is Vietnam, and we have estimates of the two crops on the right-hand side in the slightly lighter colors. What you can see if we look at the trend, we see that Cambodia has been trending upwards for some time, but this is really only kicked in since 2019. Upward trend way back 2016, even prior to that, but certainly since 2019, we've seen the new plantings kick in and production is likely to increase as time goes on. Vietnam, on the other hand, if you follow the trend line for Vietnamese production, you'll see it's relatively static, quite volatile. But putting the two together, which is the gray bars, you're seeing a steady increase in production in that region. And that too is likely to increase. It seems to me unlikely that Vietnam will increase its production, certainly not in any dramatic way, but Cambodia is likely to do so. Bear in mind, however, that the plantings and the planning were done when prices were high. So we're looking at 2016, 17, and the early part of 18. Whether farmers will continue to develop cashews while prices are low remains to be seen. And we should also remember in Cambodia that the Chinese market for various fruits has opened up. So farmers may well choose to plant those instead of continuing to expand their cashew production. But for now, a very positive figure, but probably not as good a crop as was hoped for in 2022. Looking overall at the situation, we shouldn't get overly concerned about the basic production numbers, because we're talking here about two countries that between them are only about 19% of world production. So the issues at the moment, crops in both countries lower than expected. In Cambodia, it may be a higher crop than last year, but it's lower than the expectations. In Vietnam, it looks as if the crop will be somewhere around about the same size as last year. Both cases, quality lower. That means below 50 pounds for Cambodia. That means fewer kernels generated. High stocks, high inventories in Vietnam, but as I said, of lower quality and some of it quite old. If we take the calculation and we take allowance for the lower quantity and the lower ad turn, you could see about a 15% reduction on expectations of the crop over the two countries. That means that, as we know, and no surprise at all, that Vietnam still has about 2 million tons of raw cashew nuts to be bought in 2022 to meet existing sales commitments on kernels and to meet those commitments that will be made over the next 9 months or so. But just to put that in perspective a little bit, a 15% reduction on crop expectations in Vietnam and Cambodia, that actually only represents about 2.8% of the world crop. So we're looking at quite a relatively small impact on the overall availability. But what is important is that the outturn in these two countries, particularly for the early part of the year, it tends to set the sentiment in the largest processing country, which is Vietnam. can we see season delayed? Officially, an official estimate of around 1,400 of weeks. That means we're not going to get any clarity on where that market is in the next couple of weeks. And that's important, particularly for Indian buyers who have a liking for Benin. Benin in shell nuts are very popular in India, and that may have an impact on their thinking. And it may actually send them toward Ghana for the time being to see what they can buy. Ghanaian origin is also popular in India. So the early first crop in Ghana wasn't particularly good. The flow of raw cashew nuts, you can see on my extraction here, red arrows and black arrows. The red arrows are trade which is informal or illegal, but does happen. And the black arrows are just normal, formal trade. But looking at the, there's red arrows, what has been in the past major volume crossing from Cote d'Ivoire into Ghana for exports through the main Ghanaian ports. This year, that flow seems to be stopped. Yesterday, chatting to people in Ghana, they're telling me that prices ranging 6 to 650, and that's up from a minimum price set at 5 cedis and a market which started around about 550. So we're looking at a significantly higher market at the farm gate at the moment in Ghana. Moving on to the world's largest processor. The first crop was a little bit disappointing, I'm told, in terms of the volume. Rains are needed to make the second crop, but there are rains forecast, I believe, from tomorrow, and this may well ease the situation somewhat. Meantime, prices at the farm gate have picked up. In some areas, heading up around 400 CFA. Now that's for top quality material. The prices will vary around the country. That means a warehouse price of about $770. There's costs, there's taxes, export, all to go on top of that. And it wouldn't leave a particularly high margin for exporters who are currently offering around about $12.50 cost and freight India or Vietnam. The official estimate of 1.04 million tons, about the same as last year, remains in place. I think it may be a little bit lower than that, but by no means a bad crop, but a little bit lower than that this year. Interesting also to note that processing is coming online more and more every year in Cote d'Ivoire. This year we see processors active in the country buying raw cashew nuts from traders mostly. They haven't really developed, bar one or two, they haven't really developed supply chains back to the farm gate. It's mainly the local buyers who are active at the farm gate. But processors are more active. You might see processing this year head up toward 200,000 tons. Time will tell. Burkina Faso, still quite early, forecasts positive, minimum price around 330. It's trading around about $800, which actually, to be frank, those are the reports we're hearing from the country. It sounds a little bit high to me. That product, the export of that product has a long way to go, and the processing of it at that kind of price would be high. So I think we might see that market a little bit lower than currently reported. We're going to hear more about Guinea-Bissau, Senegal, and the Gambia a little bit later on. But so far we have positive forecasts, and we have probably a crop coming in mid-April. Again, in Guinea-Bissau, it's officially regulated, so the timing of that is very much a decision of the government. But look out again for freight issues. I mean, look out for freight issues everywhere, but particularly in this area where we may see some shortage of freight, and late entry to the market might mean that you get embroiled in that. In Guinea, finally, of our West African countries, the crop's coming in. The quality is better than normal or better than average. I'm told that we're seeing 46 plus. The typical might be 45, 46. And again, early prices are high, but again, we have to be cautious looking at early prices because prices often start high early and take a couple of weeks to find their level. So across West Africa, what we're seeing in general is at the moment, in the eastern part of the region, Nigeria, Benin, question mark on Ghana, question mark on Cote d'Ivoire at the moment, lower crops than expected. Definitely not bumper crops, possibly problematic crops. As we go west, the forecasts at the moment are for good crops. There's been good flowering, but those areas might just be a little bit more susceptible to disruption of freight. So I think, again, there's nothing new about this, of course, we're looking at a pretty complex situation in West Africa in 2022 that needs to be followed quickly. Now, both Indian and Vietnamese buyers of raw cashew nuts have been relatively slow to come to the market this year. Various reasons behind that: caution, low kernels prices. On the other hand, we see cashew kernels buyers, particularly European cashew kernels buyers, probably more active in West Africa this year than at any time we've seen for, I would say, since the last generation of processors back around 2013, 2014. So we are seeing support, especially from Europe, but also from the US. And that's related to issues, closeness to market, freight, quality, traceability. These are all major factors for buyers, and it's causing them to start to look more closely in West Africa. So let's see if we can answer this question: why are kernels prices so low? So far we've looked at production, and we're definitely not seeing any explanation in the fundamentals of production for low kernels prices. So I thought we'd look first of all at processing, and then we'll have a look at demand, and then we'll have a look at the level of prices currently. So I did this exercise where we look at processing and supply chain costs, and we compare them for West Africa in a very general sense, but most of the processing is in Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire. Mozambique in East Africa, a typical situation in India, so an average situation for imported and domestically grown raw cashew nuts, and then two scenarios for Vietnam: African raw cashew nuts and Vietnamese or Cambodian raw cashew nuts. So the green bars are the cost of processing. And of course, these are averages. Some people will say they're higher, some people will say they're lower, but we have to try and set a benchmark. And the orange bars are supply chain costs. So as you would expect, in Africa, the supply chain cost is lower because the raw nuts are closer. And in Vietnam, if they're processing African raw nuts, supply chain costs are high, and local, domestic, or Cambodian raw nuts, supply chain costs are low. What you also see is that overall, the cost of processing, for all the reasons that we know, in Vietnam is lower, higher in India, and higher again in West Africa or Mozambique, but the gap is beginning to close. If we take the combination of the two, so we total the supply chain cost and the processing cost, it looks something like this. And I suppose the point really to note is that a large, efficient West African factory is getting close to a Vietnamese factory that's also processing African raw nuts. Different story if it's domestic, but if it's processing African raw nuts, we see this number starting to get very close. So looking at the situation right now in Vietnam, processing is based on Vietnamese and Cambodian raw cashew nuts. Costs are low. The quality of the raw cashew nuts is high, perhaps not as high this year as in other years, but nonetheless high. And this accounts for about 28% of the nuts processed in Vietnam and Cambodia. On the other hand, the balance 72%, which comes from African countries, we're now looking at a high cost supply chain, mixed quality raw cashew nuts. So you'll have raw cashew nuts from so many different countries of different qualities that arrives throughout the rest of the year, and a volatile market. So very much a different calculation. But given that it's 72% of the processing stock, it has a huge influence on the profitability and indeed the sustainability of Vietnamese cashew factories. If we have a look in India, about 55% of the processing stock is imported. India generally has many smaller factories. There are some large ones, but generally smaller factories. Higher processing costs, much higher processing costs than Vietnam. And that's a case of looking at scale, looking at logistics, looking at location, looking at the overall organization of the process. But India is also a protected market. It's got high kernels prices. It's got a high import duty. So that Indian processors, although even now the calculation is tight for them, they can function with relatively high RCN prices. If we look in West Africa, this example is drawn from Cote d'Ivoire, and we're looking again at lower cost RCN of mid quality, 46, 48 pounds. And by comparison with Vietnam, a high processing cost, but this figure here is $450 per ton. It's come down a long way since the days of small or manual factories. And I know there are some factories, I've taken 450 as it's a kind of a benchmark, but there are some factories that are below 400. So we are getting efficient processing with the onset of technology. If we look in Mozambique, it's a more difficult situation, I think. Factories are older, equipment is older, processing costs generally are higher, and we're looking at probably lower quality raw cashew nuts in general terms. So when we go back to our question, why are kernels prices so low, you could say, to some extent, that it's because the calculation in Vietnam at this time of year, costs are a little bit lower than they will be as they become reliant on African raw cashew nuts. So let's keep looking at this particular question, and now we'll have a look at prices and we'll see price comparison. So we're looking here at the cost of producing a 320, the benchmark grade. Again, in Vietnam, processing local or Cambodian raw cashew nuts. In Vietnam, I took the example of Cote d'Ivoire, imported cashew nuts. India processing domestic, and India processing Benin, which, okay, by the looks of it, it might be a couple of months away, maybe 3, but it gives us a benchmark calculation. So this is a calculation, and of course, this is an average calculation. Some will be higher, some may even be lower, but it's to give us an idea and a comparison with the market. So the bar goes up to the cost of a 320. If we look at 320 prices FOB in Vietnam today, we're talking here low prices around 285, 290. Clearly that's in a loss-making situation. It's around break even for Ivorian RCN, and it's a loss-making situation for domestic RCN. Obviously, India couldn't and doesn't need to compete with that, because if we look at the Indian domestic market for 320s, we see that it's relatively better than Vietnam, but by no means a good calculation. You're looking at a gross margin on this rough calculation, you're looking at a gross margin for Indian domestic processing of only around about 11%. An 11% gross margin is not a profit margin by the time other costs are added in. Similarly, it's slightly better if Benin material were to come at the current market price. But at the moment, you can see that certainly the prices being offered in Vietnam don't make sense in terms of cost of raw material. And I've listed at the bottom, and if you're interested, the rough costs I've taken for the raw material in each country. So we've looked at production and we see no clue as to why prices should be low. We've looked at costs and we're seeing no reasons as to why prices should be so low. And now we're looking at profitability relative to the market. Now we should say that very few processors at this moment in time in Vietnam are shipping contracts which are based on today's market. Most people have forward sales. They may be at higher prices. So that's one of the things that we always have to take into account, that the RCN market trades in a narrow window, but the kernels market trades in a very wide window. So containers shipped today may well have been contracted. It's possible a year ago, but more likely sometime in the last 6 months or so. And that has a huge bearing on individual businesses' profitability, individual businesses' raw material sourcing, but it tends to encourage speculation too. So it's very difficult to sell forward. If you're a large factory anywhere, but particularly in Vietnam, it's very difficult to sell forward and immediately back to back your raw material in the course of the season. So let's move on and take a look at the current level of prices, and let's see if that gives us any clues as to why we might be at such low levels for kernels. So I just put together a chart . One thing we should recognize, Africa, and I've taken.
Hello, Jim. You seem to be breaking every now and then. So maybe if you can repeat a bit of the things you've been saying in the last 30 seconds.
If we look at where these prices stand and we try to locate them in the wider history, the blue line at the top is the 5-year average price. So we're looking at a price of $3.55 is the 5-year average. This is a 3-year snapshot, but a 5-year average price at the top. And if we take the average price over the last 2 years, you're looking at a price of 301. So in both cases, the market today in Vietnam is substantially lower than the average price. But interestingly, the market in West Africa is higher than the 2-year average price from Vietnam. So let's have a look at some of the factors behind that. I want to focus in on the dip. So we look here back at the start of the pandemic. And it's understandable that there might have been a little bit of panic with the uncertainty during the early part of the pandemic. And if we go back to this period, February through to May in 2020, we see prices were low and hit the lows. Those were actually 10-year lows at the time. Same thing happened a year later. Same thing's happening now. So it's interesting that we have 3 periods early in the year in each case, in 3 successive years, where the market has crashed down. Now, there is a difference in 2022. In 2020 and 2021, the market came down very quickly from a price that was just above the average. But this year, the price has been falling for a much longer period of time. So it's come down throughout October, November, right through to today. In both of the last 2 years, this dip or crash, whatever word you want to use, was immediately followed by a recovery in prices. And that would be a question now. So if we look at this, you see 2 years in a row, both exceptional years. And in certain ways, 2022 is an exceptional year. The pandemic is not gone away, so to speak. We have the uncertainty created by the invasion of Ukraine. And we have a dip in price. In the last 2 years, that was followed by an immediate bounce back on price. Will that happen this year? Well, that's the big question. Looking at the prices in Africa, why are prices in Africa higher than in Vietnam? Well, there's a number of reasons. I mentioned earlier some of the factors that are bringing buyers to look at kernels from West Africa. So you have one basic factor, cost. The difference between freight from Asian countries to Europe or the United States, which between them are 40% of the world market, and freight from West Africa to those same destinations, the difference is about 16 cents a pound. You've got a second factor, which is due to freight and logistics, and that is that the voyage time over the last 2 years from Asian countries to Europe or North America has become incredibly long, out to 100 days in some cases. At one time, that was 35 days. Meantime, the voyage time from West African ports, from the major West African ports to destinations in Europe or North America, has stayed relatively steady. Somewhere between, well, the best you get is between 15 and 18 days, and it often goes a little bit longer than that, but it's still significantly shorter than the voyage time from Asia. So these are factors for buyers. Probably less of a concern, but nonetheless important factors, is in West Africa, it's much more likely that you can trace the origins of the cashew kernels and that you can identify single origin processing. And these are two trends that are becoming more popular. So based on those things, partly cost, which is a direct factor, and partly other factors, including quality, we see qualified African factories. Now, it's very important to notice that I mentioned qualified factories. So premium prices are not available to all factories. You need to be food safe, you need to be of a certain scale, and you need to know what you're doing in marketing in order to achieve these prices. There still are businesses that are unable to achieve these prices, and until they develop themselves, they won't have access to those prices. So you're seeing internal markets developing within the major West African processing countries too, and those are trading at lower levels. So within the kernels pricing, we're beginning to see maybe why prices are at such low levels. We've identified that these levels in terms of cost and profitability are probably not sustainable. But we can see that there is an element of sentiment and thinking in the market that might cause prices to be low. Let's have a look at raw cashew nut prices. So here we have raw cashew nut prices over just over a year. And we see that let's just identify when the kernels prices hit low levels. So we're looking at January, February of this year, and we're looking at February, March of last year. And I've just taken 285. Maybe there are lower prices out there too, but I've taken 285 as a level. The chart tracks the index, so the index is whatever raw cashew nuts were available in West Africa at the time. And therefore it's higher in the second half of the year. It's higher then, particularly as we get into East Africa. If we look at the particular origins that we're looking at, all of which are in the market today, Cote d'Ivoire, Benin, and Ghana, you can see the price track over the year. So when we look, example, Cote d'Ivoire, we see that prices are possibly slightly lower than they were this time last year. We've seen a dip and we've seen a little bit of a recovery. That's not to say that there's a great deal of trade going on. There's probably a lot of issues hanging over from last year that need to be solved in terms of quality claims, balances, contracts shipped or unshipped, A lot of those issues are still hanging there. That may be slowing down the trade. The caution that we noted earlier, both in India and in Vietnam in buying RCN, is also a factor. And to a certain extent, the uncertainty in the market. If we look at prices from the other origins, both Ghana and Benin would be significantly higher than they were at this time last year. So both of those origins are at prices which reflect roughly where they finished last season rather than where they started. Whereas Cote d'Ivoire has picked up, but just really more recently bounced $50, $75 off the bottom prices, which were roughly similar to where they were last year. So there's not really any major clue in RCN prices in the international market that would suggest why cashew kernels are so low. Let's have a look at another factor. Let's have a look at demand. If we look at demand, you might be familiar with this particular chart, which we used the last time to look at 2021. Essentially, we're seeing a really positive situation on demand. If we look at the US market, record imports in 2021, it's continued so far this year. January was the second highest January on record. The EU and UK combined had record imports last year. China the same. Vietnam had record exports. And we know that Indian consumption is recovering. Probably the level of forward cover, generally speaking, is lower at any time of year than prior to the pandemic. In general terms, kernels buyers are carrying lower inventories. They have longer voyages to deal with, and they are restricting their movement. That's one of the reasons why West Africa is more interesting, because as it was with Brazil for many years, you can hold lower inventories if you're buying from an origin that's, in the case of Brazil, 10 or 15 days away. In the case of West Africa, 15 to 25 days away. That makes a big difference. So we're not seeing anything in demand that would suggest that kernels prices should be at or heading for 10-year lows. So let's look at current affairs. I don't normally do this, but it's an exceptional case. So we look at the current situation. We have to ask ourselves, could it be the war on Ukraine? So let's look at the three factors. So first of all, is it the likely loss of trade in cashew kernels? Well, it's definitely not. The three countries in question, 11,000 tons for Russia, about 2,000 tons for Ukraine, and 30 tons, virtually nothing, from Belarus. The total combined demand of the three countries is around about 1% of the world market. So low prices are nothing to do, and you will see written in different places about trains stuck and trucks stuck in China going to Russia. Doesn't mean anything. The volume is so small as to be inconsequential. It could be, on the other hand, the threat of recession, rising costs of oil, rising costs of energy. And this probably means that freight rates will increase in 2022. It also probably means that electricity costs will increase in 2022 and all kinds of transportation. And if we do get a recession, we may see inflation that's been a factor in Western countries. We may see inflation continue for longer than expected. Most analysts said that 2022 would see inflation, but that this would recede toward the end of the year. This may sustain inflation, and that's a factor too. As an aside, it probably is a help for cashew nut shell liquid. It probably should improve the pricing of cashew nut shell liquid, particularly where that might be used as a source of energy. Probably more of a factor than either the loss in trade or the threat of recession, because we know in recessions, even in 2008, the so-called Great Recession, cashew demand stayed very, very strong. And shortly after that, we saw a big boom in cashew demand from 2011 onwards. Probably more of a factor is just the uncertainty. The fact that no one knows what may happen. The threat of more widespread war, even though that appears to be receding now, the whole uncertainty is a major factor. And if you feed general uncertainty, economic uncertainty, into a time in our business where there's always uncertainty, this period, February, March, April, that may be the reason. So it is a factor, but it's not a fundamental factor. So we've looked at production. We've looked at inventories in the two main buying countries. We've talked a little bit about Colonel's inventory. We've looked at the current level of prices, demand, global events, and we've actually come to the conclusion that there are no basic factors in any of those that would suggest that cashew kernel prices should be so low as they are today. It would appear to be completely illogical. People are offering cashew kernels at prices that they cannot cover, they will not make a profit on in the current market, that are at very low levels in a market where demand is very strong. But what is a factor is simply the market view, the general sentiment in the market. There is definitely an element of buying is more important than selling. So a dialogue that highlights factors that, right or wrong, that might impact on global prices feeds into what people need. Buyers of RCN in Vietnam, buyers of RCN in India, and buyers of kernels right around the globe. So it may be just simply a fact of market view and sentiment. And that is the one thing that can change quickest. As we've seen in each of the last 2 years, that's exactly what happened. So when we see markets that are at prices that don't really match the fundamentals, it's a time when we need to be very careful. And we need to keep an eye on what's being said and how it's being said and when buyers come to market. So let's have a general look at the outlook and a summary of what we've been saying. We think India and Vietnam will continue to buy carefully, but of course they cannot wait too long. They cannot wait too long because eventually the domestic crop and inventory positions will tighten and tighten. Secondly, we're looking at a market where cashew kernels are good value and you would expect to tend stronger, and the long-term trend has been for stronger prices. This current situation and the situation last year and the year before were early season anomalies. Definitely, we're going to see continued disruption to freight. If we thought that this was going to resolve itself in 2022, that's definitely been dashed by the war by Russia on Ukraine. Certainly, freight costs will rise. Certainly, vessel rotations will become more complicated. We're looking at a situation where the crops may be disappointing or slightly lower, but I'm not saying for this moment in time that we're looking at bad crops anywhere. We're looking at disappointing, slightly lower, but we're not looking at a situation where we're calling a bad crop by any means at this point in time. Inventories are tight, and this is accentuated by longer voyages from the origins to Vietnam or to India for processing, and definitely longer voyages, longer times to put the logistics together from the processing point to the roaster, particularly if that roaster is in the Western Hemisphere in Europe or the US. So if you were to buy something today and get it shipped right away on the move, it would still probably take about 120 days to get it to the kernels market. So that naturally means that inventories will tighten. And I think it's also, it'll be interesting to see whether or not buyers expected that, because they may well have expected that freight situations would ease in the early part of 22. So what we're seeing at the moment, I think, is a situation where what was clearly about to change, was clearly about to maybe bounce off the bottom, to put it crudely. But this has been perpetuated, it's been slowed down by the uncertainty, that uncertainty created by a number of factors. The possibility of recession, the continued trade disruption, the uncertainty regarding the war in Ukraine and how that might impact and possibly spread, the uncertainty around crops. We're looking at a situation where possibly prices which did not appear to be sustainable will drift a little bit longer. Now, until prices move, it's very unlikely you'll see kernels buyers come in and follow the market. As long as they can avail of those lower prices, they'll take their time. Usually with buyers, as the market tightens, as prices move up, they tend to follow. And it's actually a pretty good policy. Leading would have its own risks. So I think we're looking at a situation of continued uncertainty. I suspect prices will move up on kernels during this year. I feel fairly certain that that will happen, but that it may take a little bit longer than we would have expected a month ago. Thanks very much indeed. So let's
thank you, Jim.
Move on. I'll pass you back to Ernest.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jim, and always for this insightful information on the market and for the analysis that you've given us. There are a number of questions, but I'll start with a few here because majority of them are on the prices. So I'll keep them for the second set. First of all, there is a questioner who wants to know, with the repeated talks of Vietnam having big stocks, and that too in strong hands, how long will Vietnam remain disinterested
Ernest?
in the ASEAN market? Hello, can you hear me, Jim?
No, I think there's a slight.
Probably my video helps.
Okay, so there's
Hello,
a slight problem with the interpretation. It's the challenge. The channels are reversed on the interpretation. Would you mind saying that again?
Okay, so what I'm saying is that the questioner here wants to know whether with the repeated talk of Vietnam having big stocks and that being in strong hands, how long would Vietnam remain disinterested in the ASEAN market? So that's what the questioner wants to know. And again, maybe if you could take that with why you have not mentioned the cost of Indian processing with Indian nuts, as Indian crop is also substantial. You talked about India relying 5% on the export. So it means that they have still substantial volumes that they rely on for processing. So if you can take these two questions, and then I come back with the last one before going on to the prices. Jim, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can hear you, Ernest. Okay, well, I think that, first of all, why didn't I mention India? Well, because it's 45% domestic and 55% imported. In India, it's very easy to take an average figure. Plus, I think in India, the location of the factories means that some factories operate only on imported material. Other factories operate on a mix of domestic and imported. Therefore, I took the average. If we talk about Vietnam, I don't think that Vietnamese processors are running off the stocks in the country at the moment. I think some of those stocks are poor in terms of quality. I think that Vietnamese buyers are coming a little bit later to the market than expected. I wouldn't say that they're disinterested in the RCN market, but I think they're waiting and hoping that we will see a situation where the lower kernels prices impacts on RCN prices. But so far, lower kernels prices have not impacted on RCN prices. And therefore, I think that their hope of a sharp reduction in RCN prices is absolutely forlorn. Two things can happen in this market. You need eventually to find a balance. Two things can happen. Kernels prices can go up, RCN prices can go down. Which is more likely? Kernels prices are at or about 10-year lows. RCN prices are roughly where they were this time last year and the year before. Which is more likely if you think about it? Throw into that additional processing in West Africa, and those processors are operating off premium prices and can pay fair prices to farmers. I think that what we're seeing here is the beginning of the end of the old game. The old game being where you beat the hell out of RCN prices early in the season, and then you allow the market to move back up again. Ernest.
Thank you very much, Jim. The second set of questions, let me ask one coming on Ghana, where the participant wants to know what exactly is meant by the fact that Ghana's early crop is poor, whether it is in terms of quality or, well, since quality or quality, I think probably quality or quantity. And then maybe you can take that together with someone who wants to know whether cashew processing firms can consider reusing data center heat to dry cashew, and whether it will help with shorter drying days, and your opinion on that. So if you can take these quality-related issues before we move on to the prices.
Okay, Ghana. So, okay, let's think about Ghana. So here's a country that last year exported 288,000 tons of RCN. The production is about 120,000 tons. That'll change in time, but that's the reality today. The 288,000 tons comes from Burkina, it comes from Cote d'Ivoire, it comes from Mali, it comes from many different places. The early crop being poor is highlighted this year because of lower imports from Cote d'Ivoire, lower illegal, untraceable imports that were coming across the border and have done for many years. And that's because the rules are being enforced. So the crop is initially was poorer because of the quantity. Some people have said in the first flush that the quality was a little bit lower too, but I don't think that was particularly significant. So I think that the Ghanaian material is of good quality. We'll see what happens. There is a kind of a rule, and this might apply in other countries too, that if the start is not good, then you tend to see that continue. It's not always the case, but we need to look at that. So I think we're looking at, yeah, a little bit lower volume, but in quality, lower but marginal. The second question, the use of heat from data centers. Would the cashew consider using? But the thing about heat is, how do you transport it? So data center heat would mean that the data centers would have to be co-located with the cashew processing plants. I don't know of any that are. Number one, I think that secondly, data centers in general terms tend to be located in cooler countries to keep the costs low. And therefore, I'd say I'd turn it the other way around, that probably a better idea might be to use the energy from cashew shells and cashew nut shell liquid to generate the power to power the data center and power the cooling mechanisms. It's a really interesting idea. It's not one I've heard before, so thank you for that question. Ernest.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jim. And now let's move into the questions around prices. And there are a number of them, so I'm just going to read all of them and then settle with the last one which is showing here. So from the other platforms, there's a question now who wants to know what is still unclear is the fall in kernel prices from September 2021 to January 2022. Any clarifications? Then another one goes on to say, indeed, who is manipulating the prices? And wants to know whether the cashew market can be manipulated in this big way to allow for this kind of price fall over this period. And then finally, what would be the outlook in kernel prices for the next quarter, and whether it will guarantee sustainability of cashew processing in West Africa for this year? Now, take that together with what John is asking here, whether you could reflect on the price pressure from traders or retailers as a factor to kernel prices being low. So more or less, people are still unclear what is informing or influencing the fall in kernel prices, whether there is some form of manipulation, and what the outlook will be like in the coming quarter, And again, whether overall it will make a business case for processing in Africa. And then finally, whether some kind of price pressure from traders or retailers is a factor in this kernel prices being low. Jim, did you get the questions?
That's 17 questions rolled into
exactly omnibus questions for you. Yeah.
Okay. No, I don't think that price pressure from retailers is a factor. I think retailers would be pretty happy about prices. Supermarkets and retailers have been important influences in all products in all markets for many years now. And whereas they have put pressure on the margins of their suppliers, I don't think in this particular case, and we're talking about a period of low prices in cashew kernels or low or illogical prices in cashew kernels, I wouldn't be looking at retailers. If we talk about manipulation, one of the issues in our business is, and one of the reasons for this particular event, which ACA has organized, is that market information is very poor in our sector. Now, everyone talks their book. In other words, everyone says what they want. So people talk about lower prices if they need to buy. They talk about higher prices if they need to sell. They don't generally talk about the fundamentals or the logic behind it. And that, in a sense, is manipulation. I'm not suggesting that there is some grand puppet master behind all of this manipulating the market. No, I'm not suggesting that for a moment. What I'm saying is that people tend to talk their books. People tend to, it's been going on since I've been in this business since I was 23, and it's been going on all of that time. People drop a price at a time that suits what they need to do next. They drop the price of the product that they're selling, but they don't really sell it. They offer it for the wrong position. They offer it for the wrong quality. They offer it to someone who they know will not buy it. That price is in the market. Everyone else looks at it and says, wow, the market's very low. I better stay out of this market for the time being. And that happens also when you see the market in one of those boom situations like we saw last in 2017, same thing happens. So in our business, it's quite difficult to get to the nitty-gritty, to get to the reality of the situation. That's why today I said, let's have a look at the fundamentals. Do the fundamentals express the reason for the lower prices? And the conclusion we've come to is that no, they don't. That it's much more about market sentiment, it's about uncertainty, it's about fear. And in this situation, we don't see any reason why prices should be as low as 285. And clearly some buyers don't see that either because they are paying higher prices. But most buyers will follow the market, and they're right to do so. And bear in mind, most people who make purchasing decisions, they buy a lot of different things, not just cashew nuts. This is when we get down to the roaster level or the retailer level. So is there a grand manipulation going on? No. Do people talk what they want to people who know no better? Yeah, they do all the time. And therefore we need to concentrate on having some form of independent, accurate market information platforms, and we need to have an open, honest discussion around them. That's why we do this. And that's why African Cashew Alliance has been trying to develop its market information systems to offer that to African stakeholders. The outlook, I think that we're going to see cashew kernels prices improve. I think, as I was saying, when we're looking at the slides, that may happen a little bit more slowly than we might have expected. There is a great deal of uncertainty. Of course, I don't think this will happen, but if it did happen, if the war were to spread in Europe, all bets would be off, everything would change. But I personally think that that's receding as a possibility at the moment. So I would be looking for improving prices throughout 2022. I do not think that the current structure of the market undermines the sustainability of processing in West Africa. At the moment, it is possible. If you have the right supply chain and you have it developed well, if you have the right process and the right management of that process, and if you have done your work on marketing, it's possible to be profitable processing in West Africa. It's also possible to get a lot of assistance in developing your competitiveness, and some of our guests today would be instrumental in that area too. So no, I don't think it undermines the sustainability of processing in West Africa. If anything, it strengthens it. I'm not sure if I've answered all your questions there, Ernest.
Yes, you have, and thank you very much. At this stage, we move on to invite to give you the opportunity to invite your guests, and all of them are logged in now, and so please you can invite them and then start a discussion.
So I'm really pleased to invite our guests to join in the discussion. Let me tell you again who they are. Abhishek Mishra is the head of edible nuts at Valencia International, a major trading and processing company in the food business and active in a number of countries in cashew processing. We have Jean-Francois Gay of the Pro Cashew Project, a really influential project in West Africa, and Laurent Gomez of the Lift Cashew, active in similar fashion to Pro Cashew, but in different areas. Earlier, I mentioned that Pro Cashew was in Benin, Burkina, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Nigeria, and Lift Cashew is in Senegal, the Gambia, and Guinea-Bissau. So I'd like to come to Abhishek first. Abhishek, can you hear me?
Hi, Jim, and good day, good afternoon, good morning to all the people who can hear us. Thanks, Jim, for having me here.
It's good to see you. I think you're in Nigeria now, Abhishek, is that right?
Yeah, Lagos, yeah.
Great. I'm wondering, how are things there? What are you seeing in terms of cashew news, cashew crop in Nigeria?
Right. So again, like you have mentioned in your complete summary which you provided, so I agree with the first crop being the issue across the board in West Africa, and especially in Nigeria, compared to last year when we had 52, 53s also, 52, 53. This year, that high crop is not there. Though we still have, a decent 50 crops which were last year, they are not available this year. The first flush also has been a bit lower than last year. To be an issue here where the quality has come down. So this year the crop has been delayed across and in Nigeria as well. So it has been a delayed crop, and the first flush also has been a bit lower. But again, rains are something which are happening in pockets in Nigeria. So yes, we are hopeful, and none of us are, soothsayers who know what's going to happen, say 2-3 months down the line, or maybe a few weeks down the line. So fingers crossed, but yeah, we are hoping for, things to improve from here. But yes, quality has been an issue this year from Nigeria.
Okay, that's interesting. You have to be optimistic if you're in the cashew business. I think we all appreciate that.
Cashew processing business, definitely. Cashew processing business, definitely.
Abhishek, that line is...
the first few lots also which we have processed and everything, they are very promising. There's also which we have started the processing or finished those lots as well. So they are looking very promising from Nigeria aspect. And also the variations are problems per se in terms of the quality while processing from Nigeria. Especially the Obomosho material.
Abhishek, thank you. That line is not great. We're losing you from time to time. But if I got it right, that you're pretty optimistic on the outlook for processing in Nigeria, and that your early experiences have been quite good.
Yes.
I often think Nigeria is a unique in West Africa as it has a almost ready-made domestic market for cashew kernels. Is that correct, do you think?
See, when you say optimistic, you have to be. But yes, Nigeria. So not only Nigeria, if I may add.
Okay, Abhishek, that line is not working for us right now.
Lean towards, because yeah, the line was not very clear.
Yeah, I think we're losing you. I wonder, would you like to sign off and rejoin to see if we can improve the line? So let's
okay, Ernest.
All right, well, guys, we've definitely got a problem with Abhishek's line there. Let's move on, and hopefully he can fix that. Abhishek, if you can stay with us, please do stay, and perhaps that line will get better. Let me come to Jean-Francois.
Yep. Good morning.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thanks.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us. It's great to see you online. We've been looking at Pro Cashew projects and its impact. It's relatively young. Can you tell us a little bit about it, about the objectives maybe?
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity to speak about Pro Cashew. This is a USDA project, and we're there to increase production, yield, and quality. So it's the trade also that we would try to increase. And we're using a market strategy. We're working with mostly the cashew processors and the exporters that are thinking of developing a cashew processing factory or going into a business relationship directly with the farmers. So those who are investing efforts to build relationship with the farmers. So they could start or continue buying from the traders, but eventually they will develop their traceability system and move into organic certification to increase profitability on both sides. So we started with some factories in West Africa, and it's expanding this year. With new factories, and we're also developing a organic certification program for those exporters and processing factories that are looking to move into a more, I would say, supply chain linkages with the farmers. So mostly we would hope to see increased quality and higher volumes that would be processed locally and added value in the market. So we're doing that. And in Nigeria, we have a partner. And this year, he told us that, yes, there's a lower crop right now, but on the quality that they received following all the trainings on production and good practices and harvest and post-harvest technique to the farmers, about at least 2,000-3,000 farmers. From them, they are receiving a higher KOR, and this is a good sign for them that the supply chain development approach is working and is providing better revenues for them. Higher KOR will result in better output for the processing factory. So this is a little bit what we're doing, and we're happy, yeah, with this year new organic certification program. And I would say that we've took all the training in the cashew sector in the West Africa, those that were coming from ACI initially 10 years ago, those who came from the Cashew GIZ program, and some of the government of Côte d'Ivoire, the CCA, and we work with the researchers, the stakeholders, and we come up with a full set of 7 training material right now, and this will expand over the years. But those training materials are now mostly ready in the Francophone sites. They have been a national stakeholder committees to review and adopt it, to adopt the local elements of it. So raining and drying is not the same in the Sahel than in the coastal regions. And we're doing that also very soon in Nigeria and in Ghana when we'll do the translation of those materials. So right now, all these training materials are in the printing mode in the Francophone site, and we hope that in a month or so, it will be also be available in Nigeria and Ghana. So I'll stop there. That's a little bit the overall approach. We have, I think it's worth to mention, a platform for a market sharing information system. Each country will have a dashboard, and the system will be, it's called the Cashew-In. And each country has a national committee and has to develop its own database. So we've launched the database. All the parameterization is done. All the stakeholders provided what they are looking for in term of production, in terms of trading, in terms of exports, in terms of processing. So it's quite comprehensive, and now everybody now needs to start feeding the system. So this is the challenge and the target for the next 2 years.
And that is a real challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a tough job. I've been looking at production trends. We were talking about them 2 weeks ago, production trends generally in West Africa, and we've noticed that production growth is flattening. Obviously, the cashew market is expanding. Consumption is skyrocketing. Do you think that a return to fast-growing production in West Africa is likely or possible?
We're putting a big push on expanding the, if not the extension of cashew trees or orchard, but at least intensification of them. So we're helping the countries to get a strategy to increase their seedlings, and if, like in Nigeria, there's no science banks and large nurseries, so we're helping them to get grafts from other countries. We're talking to Mozambique, we're talking to Ghana, we're talking to Benin and other countries to who's going to bring grafts to start building a little bit the higher yield trees, while in the same time we're working with the research center, the CRIN, to build their own system, identifying the mother tree, the best trees in the country, and then starting to do the clone and research, and then the own science banks. But they would have already from other countries some science banks that they will be able to see the results and evaluate the reality. So I think this is an important step. So there's a lot of increase in production across in the 5 countries that we're working with. We see farmers that are expanding. So this will not continue. They're making money. They see new factories coming in, new markets. So on average, I would say that it's good for them, and they are expanding. And you know, in some of the Sahel band, we have the cotton that is in the middle, and due to I would say climatic changes, they are moving into more, even in the cocoa sector, we see farmers that are expanding the cashew has a more viable source of revenue in terms of climatic change. So
Indeed,
overall, it's increasing.
We've certainly seen research confirming areas that will become less suitable for cocoa, for example, and more suitable for cashew. And it's good to hear farmers are acting on that. I think the point you bring about the varieties is really important. We saw in Cambodia the introduction of a variety called M23 literally was a game changer. This variety, high yielding variety, also high care variety, which is a more complicating issue, but it improved yields, almost doubles the average yield. And it's from that we see a much bigger production. Jean-Francois, thank you very much. Let's stay with us and let me come to our final guest today, Laurent Gomez of the LIFT project. Good morning to you.
Oui, bonjour. Je m'excuse, je vais parler en français. J'espère que ça va. Il y aura des traducteurs, comme ça ils vont aussi travailler un peu. Allô?
Please speak French. I apologize for my lack of good French. What's the situation this year in your countries? You've been with us before and you've gave us a good introduction of your project. How do you see the crop situation developing in the countries that you're working in 2022?
Vraiment, merci de nous avoir invités à ce panel qui est très important pour nous, pour exprimer un tout petit peu la situation de la Ségavi. Je démarrerai d'abord pour les gens pour nos interlocuteurs ou participants qui sont là, afin qu'ils sachent de quoi il s'agit, ce projet, où est-ce que nous sommes. Nous sommes dans la zone Sénégal, Gambie, Guinée-Bissau, et nous travaillons dans ces trois pays uniquement et exclusivement sur la noix de cajou. C'est un projet de l'USDA, comme celui que Jean-François vient de présenter tout à l'heure. Mais nous travaillons exclusivement sur le cajou, sur la production, sur l'ensemble des axes. Donc, la situation par rapport à l'année dernière, si on l'a comparé, la situation évolue petit à petit dans la zone. Vous n'êtes pas sans savoir que nous ne sommes pas encore en pleine production. Nous sommes au début de la production, à la floraison même. Il n'y a que quelques cajous qui sortent un tout petit peu. Mais il y a des initiatives qui sont en train d'être prises de part et d'autre au niveau des différents États et que nous coordonnons. Par exemple, pour le Sénégal, nous avons la DER qui travaille d'arrache-pied avec... la DER, c'est une agence gouvernementale qui travaille d'arrache-pied avec les acteurs au niveau de la zone pour pouvoir apporter des financements nécessaires, mais aussi pour pouvoir apporter aussi de l'encadrement. Et cela aide beaucoup le projet parce qu'il y a des choses que nous ne pouvons pas faire et ce sont ces acteurs-là qui le font. En Gambie, nous considérons on considère que la noix n'est pas tellement produite. C'est un petit pays de production. Mais nous avons aussi des aménagements qui sont en train de faire au niveau au niveau du port surtout, au niveau des entrepôts, etc. Donc, c'est-à-dire que les gens sont en train de se préparer petit à petit. En Guinée-Bissau, la reprise économique de la Guinée-Bissau a commencé à se faire petit à petit aussi. Et vous n'êtes pas sans savoir que la Guinée-Bissau a atteint pour l'an 2021 a atteint 3,5% contre 1,5% au niveau de la transformation et au niveau de la monétisation. Et donc, ce qui veut dire qu'aujourd'hui, la Guinée-Bissau est presque prête. Donc, nous avons une situation qui évolue cette année positivement au niveau de notre zone. Donc, de manière ramassée, c'est ce que nous avons dans la zone pour ce qui concerne le projet. Parce qu'en fait, nous avions eu à faire beaucoup de formations en direction de la qualité et ces formations ont commencé à impacter actuellement sur le niveau de la production, etc. Il y a eu même des échanges qui étaient prévus dans la zone Côte d'Ivoire, Bénin, etc., mais qui n'ont pas eu de résultats positifs pour le moment. Mais localement, il y a la coordination de l'ensemble des chercheurs de la Ségabi, de la Guinée-Bissau, de la Gambie et du Sénégal qui s'est réunie et ils sont en train de travailler sur comment sauvegarder les variétés locales que nous avons aujourd'hui, puisque nous avons les meilleures qualités actuellement presque en Afrique. C'est vrai que nous n'avons pas les quantités qu'il faut, c'est-à-dire les rendements qu'il faut, mais la qualité est de mise. Donc, voici en grosso modo ce que je peux dire par rapport à la situation générale au niveau de la zone Ségabi.
Thank you very much. I think there's definitely strengths, particularly of the quality in that area. And it's interesting that all three of our guests today have stressed on quality, and particularly if we look in Guinea-Bissau, Senegal, and the Gambia, we see very high quality nuts. We heard Jean-Francois tell us that they are working on improving outturns and quality of raw cashew nuts in the eastern part of the region. So, Laurent, you're expecting good crops this year then, I think.
Pardon? Allô? Allô, ça coupe là.
Ouais, on te demande,
Certainly.
Laurent, si tu attends
Laurent,
une bonne production cette année.
It's sad, but it sounds like you expect good crops in Senegambia region this year.
Oui, cette année, on est très optimiste par rapport à la production parce que tout simplement, l'année dernière, si je compare à l'année dernière, à pareil moment, on avait eu de fortes, de fortes tempéries de vent. Il y avait beaucoup de vent l'année dernière qui faisait que, bon, à un moment, on a eu beaucoup de chutes de fleurs. Et cette année, on n'a pas eu ce même phénomène. Et déjà, dans certaines exploitations, c'est-à-dire quand tu vois déjà au centre du Sénégal, dans la zone de Kaolack, Fatick, etc., la production commence à arriver à compte-gouttes déjà, donc ce qui veut dire que c'est un très bon signe. Et dans la zone Casamance, Guinée-Bissau, jusqu'une partie de la Gambie, nous avons aussi les fleurs qui se maintiennent. Donc cette année, on s'attend à à un rendement meilleur par rapport à l'année passée. En plus de cela, vous avez aussi les nouveaux champs qui ont été mis en place depuis 2-3 ans avant que je ne vienne. Ces champs aujourd'hui encadrés par des pépiniéristes professionnels formés par le projet. Donc ces champs aujourd'hui commencent à donner des résultats. Donc ce qui veut dire que nous allons avoir, on a un tout petit peu un remplacement générationnel au niveau des champs, ce qui va donner de bonnes productions. Vraiment, on espère cette année que du côté Sénégal et surtout de la Guinée-Bissau, il y aura de très bonnes productions cette année.
Merci, Laurent. Merci beaucoup. Thanks to our two contributors, Laurent of the Lift Cashew project and Jean-Francois Gay of the Pro Cashew project. Both have really good websites, which are well worth visiting, and you can get a really good idea of what both projects are doing and the outlook for those projects. And I would recommend a visit to both of those websites. Time is coming against us, as always. I want to come back to Abhishek before we finish, because we lost him through the quality of the line. I hope it's a little bit better now. Abhishek, just forgive me for putting you on the spot as we finish. What's your view on the kernels market as 2022 goes on?
Right. So I hope I'm clear now. The voice is better.
Yes, Abhishek, you are clear. Please go ahead.
Great. So just before arriving there, Jim, just for a background a bit, this year, apart from the quality, the
looks like we still may have some problems with Abhishek Mishra's line.
Ernest, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. So Jim, Abhishek is clearer, so maybe he can go ahead.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Abhishek, I was asking, what's your view of the kernels market
Right. So before arriving at the kernels market,
going
just to
forward?
give you just to give you an idea before going to the kernel market, just
Sure.
to give you an idea that the freights also from West Africa and especially Nigeria have increased a lot over the last year. So typically the raw cashew which will be arriving in Vietnam or India are expected to be a bit more higher. And especially the cost for most of the traders or processors who will be importing the cargo into India or Vietnam, their costs will be marginally higher owing to the freight costs as well and having the quality issues. Now, coming to the kernel markets, I completely agree with you. The issue with the Indian market has been that the holes have not been moving as much as we were hoping. Obviously, there is a festival which is coming up, the Festival of Colors, Holi, but the offtake has not been as high as we were expecting it. The pieces or the brokens market, on the other hand, since it is fueled or it actually is supported by a huge consumption demand in India, so pieces are still moving off the shelves much higher, although some amount of inventory still remains with most of the processors when it comes to the holes. So the idea is that over the period of November, December, that is when there was partial lockdowns in India as well into different areas because of increasing cases. So that is one part where a lot of marriage and festivals and celebrations happen, which were postponed for the first half of this year. The expectation from the market is that with these celebrations in line, there should be an increased consumption. But believe me, I hope I'm not wrong in saying it, as processors, we have been waiting for that consumption to happen for the last 1 month now, and we are still keeping our fingers crossed and being optimistic that yes, that consumption will come, and hopefully the prices will come back to 600, 640 plus levels for on W320 basis.
Okay, thank you, Abhishek. That's an optimistic note. And as we come to the end, I think there is a general, Ernest.
Jim, maybe before you end this session with them, maybe a couple of questions, but I'll sum it all into one question, which can then go to Jean-Francois and Laura, because somebody wants to know to what extent the agricultural extension professionals in the ministries of agriculture are being involved in the interventions that are coming out to address production in Africa. Because we heard from Pro Cashew, we heard from Lift Cashew, all the efforts they are putting in. But again, how are they integrating governments or partnering governments to get all these issues addressed?
Jean-Francois, maybe you would have a thought on that one. The inputs and the position of government extension officers in production expansion.
Thank you. Good question. I think it varies from government to government. We've seen where we have extension agents from the government, we have easier collaboration and work with the farmers. We have the relay in those people so that they are able to do the trainings. This is really helping us, and they are closer to these farmers, so they are providing better advices and training. So this is, I say, better. Now, in some countries, there is no extension agents, and in others, they are not fully in good condition to support their mission as themselves. So sometimes as a project, we are providing them some per diem and costs so that they can support the farmers in terms of planting material and preparing the field and the training, and also sometimes when we're doing the surveys and on the following of their growing season. So it's important, and it's not yet there everywhere. Thank you.
Yeah, it's always a mix of development, government, and private to try and get it right, and it's not always easy to coordinate all three, but it's a good question, isn't it?
Yeah, we're trying to have a mixed approach also, and this is why we don't want to intervene ourselves by alone. We always try to get a processing factory or an exporter that is looking into the development of their own supply chain, so that they have their agents, their commercial agents that are collecting the raw cashew nuts in each collection centers, if we can say, and then they are supervising or preparing the trainings and the work that they want to do with the farmers with the extension agent if they have. So this mix is good, and it helped these agents from the processing factory to become more knowledgeable about the training material and the support that they would or eventually will take over from these extension agents in a sense.
Thanks, Jean-Francois. Laurent, what has been your experience in Senegambia region dealing with government extension officers? To what extent are they active?
Oui, en fait, nous avons, dès l'entame du projet, mis en place un concept qui s'appelle les coachs. Et ce sont des agents qui sont internes au projet. Et donc, les coachs nous permettent de pouvoir collecter l'ensemble des informations, disséminer aussi les technologies en zone de production et être aussi affiliés dans les coopératives qui font la production elles-mêmes. C'est-à-dire aujourd'hui, ces coachs-là, une fois disséminé ces informations en relation avec les coopératives, on les lie directement avec ce que nous appelons les DRDR au Sénégal, ou bien comment dire, les advisors en Gambie, ou bien ce qu'on appelle les grandes coopératives en Guinée-Bissau. Et donc, c'est un axe de transfert pour nous qui permet au gouvernement de pouvoir utiliser l'ensemble des connaissances qui ont été déjà transmises et de pouvoir les garder avec eux. C'est-à-dire, on a pensé dès l'entame du projet à comment avoir un axe durable, c'est-à-dire parce qu'on a constaté que nos prédécesseurs ont fait beaucoup de choses, mais ces choses sont restées entre les populations et que les gouvernements ne peuvent pas capitaliser ces expériences-là. Donc, à l'entame même du projet en 2020, quand on est venu, on s'est dit, essayons de voir avec le gouvernement quelle sera sa participation et comment les faire réellement bénéficier de toute l'expertise du projet. Et c'est ce qui s'est fait. Et aujourd'hui, nous commençons à avoir ces résultats-là. Voilà pourquoi la recherche, l'ISRA du Sénégal, NARI en Guinée, en Gambie et IMPA, en Guinée-Bissau ont participé activement à la recherche de nouvelles variétés, à la fixation des variétés existantes et au contrôle de qualité de la noix, en fait. Donc, il y a un travail très fort qui est en train de faire avec le gouvernement. Mais à côté de ça aussi, pour la vulgarisation, on a mis en place ce qu'on appelle dans le cadre politique les comités de pilotage. Et c'est un agrégat de l'ensemble des instances décisionnaires sur le cajou. Si tu prends par exemple le ministère de l'Agriculture, le ministère du Commerce, le ministère de la Recherche professionnelle, etc., le ministère de l'Industrie, toutes ces personnes-là sont intéressées par le cajou. Donc, on a mis en place quelque chose qui s'appelle un comité de pilotage. Et ces steering committees permettent de réguler, de discuter sur les nouvelles orientations, mais aussi sur la qualité. Qu'est-ce qu'on doit faire pour maintenir la qualité, augmenter les rendements, etc., etc. Donc, c'est un travail qui est en train qui a démarré depuis 2000 et aujourd'hui qui commence à avoir ses fruits. Merci.
Thank you, Laurent, for that comprehensive response. I see one question in the text. Tarciso Falcao asks if we could have more discussions on Nigeria. We are going to do that. Last time we had I should remind you, by the way, the ACA conference is in September, is in Nigeria this year. The last time we had a focus on Cote d'Ivoire. So what we'll do is every second week we'll pick a country, and one of those will be Nigeria, and we'll give a little bit more detailed analysis on that. We have had some good information on the Nigerian situation today from our guests. I'd like to thank them. Jean-Francois Gay from the Pro Cashew Project, Abhishek Mishra from Valencia International, and Laurent Gomez from the LIFT project in Senegambia. Thank you all very much indeed for your time and your expertise and your knowledge so professionally expressed. From me, I'd just draw your attention to the next couple of weeks, what to look out for. We've heard from Abhishek, look out for the trends in consumption in India. If Indian consumption starts to upturn again, that's a signal to the market. Look out for developments on freight. Look out for kernels buyers in the market in Vietnam. If you see, I think we should say that if you see kernels prices pick up in Vietnam, you'll see them pick up everywhere. That doesn't mean that RCN prices are going through the roof. We've had a look at the costings today. Kernels can pick up, but it doesn't mean RCN will move up. And by the way, vice versa too. Interesting couple of weeks ahead. We're looking for improved arrivals everywhere. We're looking to figure out exactly what is the size of the Cambodian and Vietnamese crop. And when we come back in 2 weeks, we are going to talk to you about those issues again. So again, thank you to my guests. Thank you to all of you for your interest in attending today. And thank you to the African Cashew Alliance. I'll pass you back to Ernest.
Thank you very much, Jim, and thanks so much for the excellent work by you always. Our appreciation also goes to our participants who have been with us all this while on Zoom, Facebook, Microsoft Teams, YouTube Live, and so we come your way in 2 weeks. It is from us saying thank you so much, and also to remind you, as Jim has said, that the next conference is in Abuja in September, and we expect to see all of you there. And bye-bye to everyone. And please use the chat, which is here for your networking. We want you to interact and to also do business on our platform. So we'll leave it open for at least another 30 minutes so that you can contact people who are here and make whatever business you want to make. Thank you so much, and bye-bye to everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
What do you care most when buying color sorters? What makes better sorting performance? What ensures high stability and reliability regardless of 1 unit or 10,000 units? Quality is all. Mayer Smart Factory is built for production of color sorters and dental CBCT. The factory has completed its first phase construction and is the most advanced production base in the industry. Mayer Smart Factory started construction in March 2018 with a construction area of nearly 70,000 square meters and a total investment of nearly $45 million. It takes full consideration of resource